All right. Welcome again to our monthly Zoom call. Um, we are really fortunate and excited to have Brenda Harrington as our guest this month. I first met Brenda, and I want to just do a little personal thing for Brenda because I met her about 10 years ago when I was working in the federal government. I was a manager and I decided I wanted to be a leadership coach. I had no idea what that involved. And Brenda was selected to be, or I should say, I was lucky to have Brenda selected as my mentor. So I have known Brenda for about 10 years. And what really struck me about her was just her presence and her compassion and her empathy, and honestly, her emotional intelligence, and how she guided me. And we quickly became friends. And so now to see how she has taken her business and then written this book, it just does my heart. It's so good to see that, Brenda. So let me give you a quick bio of Brenda. So she is a certified executive coach and leadership development facilitator. Brenda works with clients to help them enhance their leadership competencies and build capacity. Her partnership with leaders is centered on the development of professional habits that will enable them to have the greatest possible impact. Brenda's career experience includes management positions with Fortune 10 corporations and executive leadership roles with mid-sized firms. She's the author of Access Denied: Addressing Workplace Disparities and Discrimination, a book that recounts the work-life experiences of people of color through stories, which we are going to talk about today. So Brenda, welcome. It's our pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here, Lisa. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it goes without saying that we share mutual admiration. I'm just so proud of the things that you've accomplished and in awe of the things that I watch you do. So thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. So, we are going to dive into some questions, and some of them are a little difficult. In all honesty, even though you shared with me some of your personal stories, it wasn't until I read the book that it opened my eyes really to what is going on in the society, but also in the workplace. And so, I want to ask you right off, like, why did you decide to write this book?
Well, immediately in response to what you just said, because so much of what we're experiencing takes place in the workplace. I had no plan to write a book before the spring of 2020. But as we know, events that took place in the United States in the spring of 2020 ignited conversations about race and privilege that really took things to another level. And the good thing is that it got people talking. The frightening thing for me, speaking for myself, is that it exposed so many things that I think many of us thought were behind us. And so I felt I took that as a call to action. And I don't mean to sound dramatic, but it really hit me in a way that nothing had previously. Certainly, it's not the first time that we had heard about or experienced, murders at the hand of police or in racial circumstances and things like that. But just the culmination, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and on and on and on, and the conversations that emerged, I wanted to start a conversation of my own. I didn't want it just to be about what occurred, but I wanted to provide a tool, much like I do in my practice, right? I wanted to uh, give give people the means to, one, think about what they might be experiencing differently, and for those who were not experiencing things directly, to think about how they could increase their awareness and maybe think about taking a different posture or approach. And so the book is a compilation of stories, but it also provides coaching and reflection tools to help people to learn and grow, but also to take a different approach to the circumstances they may face.
Yeah, I really do enjoy that about your book because you're right. You do bring other voices in to the conversation to show that it's not just Brenda Harrington's story, it's so many other people's story. And I love that how after every chapter, you do have places for people to reflect on some really deep questions that are pretty significant. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But thank you. I love that it is a call to action, and I appreciate that it's out in the world, much needed. So I'm curious, Brenda, when did you first realize that prejudice existed?
One of the first stories I tell in the book, my seventh birthday. I asked my mother if I could go to school without braids, and she acquiesced. And I came home that day from school with a note pinned to my chest. And I thought that I had done something wrong. And the note basically was asking my mother not to let me come to school with my hair not in braids because it was too distracting. So that was the first time that I realized that there was something different about me. And then another story that I tell in the book, and certainly, a lot of things were happening around that time. That was early, well, mid 60s, the assassination of Martin Luther King, you know, um, all of the things that were going on. But the next most significant, I'll say, personal incident involved my sister. My sister always wanted to be a nurse growing up. And her guidance counselor in high school told her that she should forget about being a nurse, but if she was enamored by the white uniform, she could be a hairdresser or a caterer. And so, fortunately, she did not listen to that bad advice. And she not only completed nursing school, but she became the RN that she wanted to be, the registered nurse. And in those days, registered nurses wore white caps with black bands. And at the time that she graduated from nursing school, I was then a student at the high school, and that same guidance counselor was there. And so I took that picture of my sister to school with me, and I went to see the guidance counselor. And I said, you told Yvonne Curtis in 1965, 1966 that she couldn't be a nurse, and you were wrong. And I put the picture on her desk. Don't know how I wasn't escorted out, but nevertheless. So those are two early memories that really
Yeah.
had an effect on me.
Yeah. When I read that story, my sister was a nurse, but she didn't face any of that at
Right.
all, being a white girl. So wow, that really spoke to me. And I really was struck by your parents and how the role that they played and your role models. Like, how did that factor into who you became? Your role models and your parents.
Yeah. You know, my parents, with all due respect, I think they bought into the idea that, we were in a period of change and that things were going to get better, be better, and we could do better. My parents worked very hard to give us the best lives that they could. They were very proud of owning their own home and things like that. And by the way, I should clarify for the audience that these events that I'm referring to were in Mount Vernon, New York. They weren't in the South. Okay, we lived in Mount Vernon, New York, just outside of New York City. Um,
Mhm.
and so they always told us, they always helped us to build confidence. They never let us believe anything other than the fact that we could be, and do whoever we wanted to be, do whatever we wanted to do. And so that was powerful. I can't say that we always knew what that meant or what that always looked like, but it really did help us to understand that there was a path forward beyond what we were experiencing and beyond what was happening at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely parents play a big role for sure. And thank you for highlighting about being in New York, where we think like it's different in the North compared to the South, but it really, is very familiar. So throughout your book, you mention the importance of mentors that people of color, especially, really need to have people in their corner and be mentors. Could you explain a little bit more about why that's so important?
It's important because we are so susceptible to gaslighting. And if you pay attention to the wonderful foreword that was written for the book by a woman by the name of Dr. Christy Pekikaro, who actually coined the term discriminatory gaslighting, she talks in
Mm,
an NPR interview about her experience being accepted to Princeton University. She's a tenured professor now at a university, an institution here in the Washington, D.C. area. But she talks about how she spent a lot of time dealing with imposter syndrome, questioning whether she
mm,
was enough. people telling her, despite her accomplishments, that she was only there because of race. Okay, and to that I lean back to a statement made by Ursula Burns, the first Black CEO of Xerox, who said, "I'm here because I'm good enough. I belong here." And so it's important to have those voices in your ear because gaslighting is pervasive when it comes to race relations in the workplace. It just is, and you need to have someone else to kind of pressure test what you are experiencing or what you think you're experiencing. You need to hear from other voices to get different perspectives because it can have a very profound impact on you emotionally, sometimes physically, with the manifestation of diseases as a result of stress and things like that. And it's important to be able to have a group to process what you're experiencing and what you're feeling with. I go beyond talking about mentors. I say we should all have our own mini advisory board, okay? So you really have a diverse group of people to talk about your experiences and what you're feeling. It's part of why I begin in the introduction to say, one, you're not alone with what you're experiencing, and two, you are not crazy. What you are experiencing is real because we really spend a lot of time second guessing and blaming ourselves.
Yeah. I do love that. Like, right. I think it's like the first paragraph of your book. You're like, you are not alone. And this is happening everywhere. So yeah, I think a lot of people need to hear that. So thank you for that. So let's go back a little bit to the corporate world. You were in Fortune 10 companies. You decided to leave it behind after facing these constant barriers and discrimination. Do you feel that the corporate world has made any advancements when it comes to creating safe and equitable cultures?
It ebbs and flows, Lisa. I wouldn't say that there have been meaningful changes because, in my opinion, meaningful change ties back to accountability. You can't change hearts and minds. If you have a belief in a particular caste structure where it comes to human beings, then that's your belief and that's your value. But when you come into my workplace, I have expectations and I expect you to meet those expectations, and I'm going to hold you accountable. And that's what's missing in most places when it comes to environments in corporate America. And I hate even using that term because I don't like to categorize, but unfortunately, over many years, it just continues to ring true. So the safety of the space really depends on the person at the helm. And there's
Mhm.
a lot of competition, right? There's competition for shareholder value, which leads. We know that, right? We're beholden to shareholders, we're beholden to board members, we're beholden to benefactors, whatever it is, if it's in a nonprofit environment, for example. So no, I don't feel there's been meaningful change. And people like to look at the Ursula Burns of the world or Ken Chenault, who led American Express. Certainly, we had a Black president, Barack Obama, and now we're paying handsomely for that 8 years, in my opinion. Um, those are exceptions, but I think people like to believe. Some people like to believe. Well, there are a couple of outliers. Those people happen to be particularly smart or brilliant, creative or brilliant or whatever it is. But the reality is there are a lot more of us, but nobody's looking. Nobody's looking. And so companies make great strides sometimes with their diversity numbers for compliance, but when it comes to actual inclusion and having influence on the business, how the business is conducted, it's not there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like people are checking the boxes, signing a declaration of inclusion or, hiring a DEI manager. But like you said, if the if the people who are in power, the people in charge, typically the C-suite, if they're not embracing it and living it, then it's not going to happen. And so I agree with you, like having expectations of how you should be treated. I mean, everybody should be treated that way. And so it's even more of a climb. So thank you for that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how do we, create more inclusive cultures a little bit later. But I'm curious about, why do you think right now that governments and schools and companies are rolling back these DEI initiatives? Maybe you alluded to it a little bit, but what can we do to stop this trend?
Well, those are two very different questions. Let's take the
I
first
I
part.
know, I know. It's a loaded question.
Well, certainly the short answer is fear. Um, for governments and school systems and municipalities, they're at risk of losing government backing and funding and all the things they need to keep the train on the track. So that's a much bigger question. For companies, I said it's, the obligations to shareholders and backers and all those things. Um, you know, what concerns me about the fear is, what are you afraid of, right? And for the most part, and I'm not just talking about, we're not just talking black and white, we're talking diversity in general. I think that there are a lot of people who find it alarming that the demographics have in the United States have and are changing so significantly. And
Mhm.
so, it's a matter of giving up power. They have the power, they enjoy the privilege, and they don't want to give it up because they don't know what that would look like. They don't see the value of diversity. They don't see the value of getting to know and understand people who don't look like them. And that's why it's happening in
Yeah.
short. We could talk about that for 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, we
Um,
definitely could,
how do we
and maybe
stop?
we should
Well,
down
maybe
the
a
road.
retreat. I don't know. What can be done to stop the trend? And
Yeah, that's a
was
tough one.
part of, yeah, that's part of, what motivated me to write the book also, because I think that we have to face it at every front, death by a thousand cuts, right? And so any opportunity that any of us has to address something, to speak up, to call something out, we've got to take that opportunity because silence is communicating that it's okay. Okay, so I don't think that we can take our foot off the gas and we've got to be willing to speak up. And for a lot of people, that's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that firsthand. And I didn't share this with you last week when we saw each other, but I live in Vermont, a very progressive state. But yet there are these pockets, and you mentioned something about you're not going to change certain people. You just aren't. It's not going to happen. They don't see the value. And you brought up a really good point that it's fear based. It's this power struggle, but it's fear that if I'm not in control, oh my God, that I'm going to get the short end of the stick. And so in my tiny little sleepy town of 11,000 people, there's been this wave of people trying to take over school boards, and you've probably seen this across the country. And these people got on the board last week, and the first policy that they passed, the first policy was to take down the BLM flag. And so this morning it was so what the community did, and like you said, like to not say anything is complicit, being complicit to it. And I was so heartened that when I looked at the school entrance, that there were a bunch of people with their BLM flags and the gay pride flags, and they were just flying them saying, this is not all right. So I really agree with you that when you are faced with it, you have to use your voice and your actions and your voting to change that trend. So thank you, Brenda, for calling that out. So here's something a little more sticky. Um, how can white people support people of color so that they don't face the challenges that you have faced over your career? What is
Yeah.
it that white people can do to be better allies?
I want to zoom out on that a little bit, Lisa, because I don't
Please.
think it's just for people of color. I think it's for everybody. And it goes back to this understanding and acceptance that diversity is good, but there are some people that just don't feel that way. So I think that if you're a person who has benefited from increased awareness over these last few years, and you feel that you want to do something, I think it's really important to think about it holistically. A question that I ask my clients often, unrelated topics. What's the worst that could happen? Because you've got to be prepared for that. If you're going to speak up, if you're going to support someone for an opportunity or a promotion or for something that others don't feel is favorable, right? Or that really sets you apart from your peers. But those are the kinds of things that have to happen. We have to be a bit more assertive, more radical, if you will, and just be willing to take some risks. And that's a hard thing for people to do. I understand that. But those are
Mm.
the things that need to happen. When we talk about, when we speak about challenges associated with gender, right? Gender dynamics and the absence of female representation on boards, I say we can't all have this we can't just have this conversation among ourselves, a group of women talking about, the fact that it's not fair, it's not right, we need to have more representation. Everybody needs to be in that conversation. And so it's the same thing here. And I think that you've got to be very strategic and really pay attention to the politics to know what you're getting into in order to make meaningful change and have meaningful impact, because otherwise, quite frankly, you're relegated or delegated, to the group you're trying to represent. And I don't take that lightly. But those are the kinds of things that need to happen.
Yeah. Well, you set me up nicely for my next question. Because in your book, you wrote, playing politics, leveraging networks, and building relationships, having access to a community and support system is necessary for survival and is essential to our ability to thrive. And I'm just wondering, can you share how possibly emotional intelligence can help people achieve this objective?
Emotional intelligence is ground zero. It's the starting point. I mean, how are others behaving? Is their behavior and are their actions aligning with what they're saying, right? We proceed in so many aspects of our lives based on with so many assumptions, based on assumption, based on how we would handle something or what we would do or how we perceive things. And it doesn't matter. We've got to pay attention to what others are feeling and what others are doing. So the first thing really is to figure out, if there's alignment between what you see and what you hear. And then it's, where is the safe place? If I'm a leader, how can I create a safe environment for meaningful conversations, right? And what does that look like? What do I want the outcome to be? And what do I do with that information? And that's whether I'm the person that is potentially being impacted by disparities or I'm the leader, okay? Empathy
Mm.
is at the core. We've just got to be willing to think about how others are processing their environment and why they're showing up the way they are. What is it like to be in that person's shoes? Okay, I've seen so many white counterparts struggle with the fact that, they are more open-minded than perhaps their families, than their immediate circle of friends, but they're in this struggle, right? Pulled from, in both directions. And that's a hard place to be. Okay. But what can you do in that moment? So it's grounded, in my opinion, in emotional intelligence. But so many people for so many years have been told, up until a few years ago, thank you, David Caruso and others, that we don't talk about emotions at work. We come here to get the job done and we go home and da, da, da. But we've got to start with the connective tissue, and that's all about emotion.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's like, so how do, like, when you talk about fear, that people have this fear, and we talk about emotional intelligence to be open to all emotion and to go deeper, like, why do I feel that way? Why do I feel fear? Why do I feel anxiety? And they talk about, like, white people who try to find their voice, that they get embarrassed or they feel ashamed or they feel guilty. I hear this a lot from white people. I don't want to mess this up and I don't want to whatever. And so, you know, how do,
Yeah.
how do people stay? open, like how do people do you find that it's like maybe understanding like people's stories? Is that a good place to getting to know people?
Story is a great place to start, which is why I tried to compile a collection of meaningful stories in the book. I think you first have to ask permission, though, and acknowledge your discomfort and awkwardness. I've had many people come to me and say, I have some questions. Would you mind having a conversation? And please forgive me if I don't say this right or I don't express it properly. I don't really know where to start. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's very different than just kind of bulldozing into a conversation. You don't know where the person is coming from because depending on the questions and the approach, the questions may appear not to be coming from the best place, right? And so it's important, I think, to kind of set expectations, lay the groundwork, and make sure that everybody's ready for the conversation and willing to have the conversation, and also to address whether or not there are any particular boundaries. I said people make a lot of assumptions, right? And so you want to honor those areas, those things that might be triggers, okay? And those places that some might consider off limits. It's so interesting. Summer 2020, someone approached me and asked me if we could have a deep conversation about what was going on. And during the conversation, and during that time, I was exhausted, honestly. I was because so many people were asking, clients in particular from outside of the United
Mhm.
States, what's going on there? I thought that was the United States of America. How's this? All this. So it was a taxing time. Uh, but I also tried to set my own guardrails because I realized what I was experiencing emotionally with all of this bubbling up. I hadn't thought about that seventh birthday in a lot of years, I'll say. I had a lot of things that just started to bubble back up. And I said, well, once we get into the conversation, I want you to know I'm just going to be very open and I hope you're ready for that. And so I made sure that I had agreement with the people that wanted to talk to me, that it wasn't going to be one way. But during one of those conversations, the gentleman said, well, I wonder what your husband would say if we were having this conversation. And I said, he wouldn't have a conversation with you. His walk and my walk have been very different for a lot of different reasons. And they're particularly for Black men in America. There are some things that everybody's not going to be willing to bring up in mixed company. Okay. And so I think that if you do some planning ahead of the conversation, do some preparation, ask a few questions, and come to agreement about how you have the conversation and what you want the outcome of the conversation to be. Much like the course that we've developed around the book that I shared with you, Lisa. I want to know
Yeah.
what is it that you want to get out of this, really, because that's important to me to know what you want to do with this data and information.
Yeah. No, I like how you say, that we have to have some boundaries and some dialogue first. And I know that when same with me, until 2020 happened, I was kind of asleep at the wheel, and that woke me up. And I was desperate I really wanted to learn. And my tendency was, well, ask people of color, and I didn't realize, and until I had somebody very blunt say to me, you need to educate yourself first. You need to understand, here's some courses, here's some books. Read that first. And the other thing is, and we know when fear and is driving us, that we don't always act in the best way. And what we want to do is fix it. So we're going to come in and rescue people of color and we're going to fix it. And we end up doing more harm. And I've learned, my own journey is I've made some mistakes. But what we always say in emotional intelligence is the biggest strategy is to say, I am really sorry, I screwed up. And I've had to say that a few times. And it is a learning journey. But to have somebody of color to be able to say, I'm willing to do this, but I'm not going to make you feel better. And I'm
Right.
not going to educate you. and here's some things that I can share with you, but to have really clear boundaries and really clear, like you said, is what is that outcome that we're hoping for?
And
So yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but I'm not here to make you feel better. Our whole walk in the workplace, if you're one Black person on a team of 20, half of your existence is about making others feel comfortable, right?
yeah,
Before you can even get to the work. And that's a big part of it. I mean, there are so many spaces that we are required, where we're required to perform at the highest levels, higher than others perhaps, that are just not made for us, you know,
yeah,
that really are not accommodating.
right. Yeah, and you mentioned that in your book, that the expectation is you're going to work 10 times as hard, do 10 times a better job than anybody else, show up, pleasant and not being your authentic self, which is really difficult, to live in that environment. And you mentioned about these microaggressions that occur and constant microaggressions that all of a sudden become so big that they're a macroaggression, and you just can't function. And that's, again, it's like diversity. You talk about, there's all kinds of diversity in the workplace, and it is about taking the best of everybody to align those strengths to make them work. Go ahead, Brenda.
I think some of the greatest damage that we've done, though, when I look back over the last 30, 40 years, we went through this whole period where, we were using well, I wasn't, many were using the term colorless. I don't see color. You have to see color. You know, that to say that the world is colorless is not a solution. And
Mm,
I think that, that is what has gotten us in part to, well, where we landed a few years ago, certainly. Because when you say you were awakened, people, I think a lot of people had resigned themselves to the fact that, everything was beautiful, everything was okay. Um, but from my vantage point, I was about to say our vantage point, and I think I can, but to be safe, I'll say from my vantage point, once you are in a position where you feel like you have achieved a level of acceptance and understanding, you have to realize that you're still probably at 99.9, if that. Because what happens is you begin to be seen as something other than, right? Oh no, she's one of us. She's different from the others. Just like the comment I made earlier about Chenault and Ursula Burns and Barack Obama. I mean, I'm no different. I'm that little Black girl from Mount Vernon, New York, before anything that you have printed on a business card outside my door, any title you give me, that's who I am. And to just assume that I have discarded all of what has come to be my identity to be part of this group is really insulting.
mm,
Okay. But that's
yeah,
almost what you have to do. That's how a senior executive ends up at a business retreat impacted by a conversation about slavery in a business setting, okay? Because they assume, oh, you're just like us and it's just history and why should it bother you? We're just having a conversation, inappropriate, okay? But
yeah,
those considerations are not made when you don't have people who reflect the audience involved in making plans and decisions. Okay, so that just gives you an example. There's
yeah,
zero emotional intelligence present in this, no
yeah.
consideration for anyone or anything but the dominant group.
Yeah, I have to admit that story you told me about that, executive retreat at a plant, was it a plantation? And or something, and you were like, I'm not comfortable, and they just didn't get it. And I'm just like, that just hit me hard. So you're right. It's like figure, you have to, again, emotional intelligence is what might happen if I do this, if I bring all these executives, and what should I consider, and who is coming, and what is the impact of doing this on the team. And so you're right. It is. taking into consideration your histories and who you are. And that's why getting to know people is so critical. What is their story? What are their values? And that's part of emotional intelligence. Just this conversation could also be tiring as well. And that's why so appreciative that, Brenda, you were willing to do this, because I know it does bring up, and we always say this when we talk about emotion, it brings up emotion within us. So we have to recognize. And so, you know, how to end our conversation is very important as well. I don't want to end it quite yet. Is there any questions or comments or anything more that anybody would like to add? And Brenda, if you want to, feel free to add whatever you'd like to. We have a few minutes.
I just want to express gratitude, for the time today and the fact that we were able to have this conversation. And I'm grateful for the sharing that has occurred. I've seen a few of the comments pop up. But I want to encourage everyone to think about, what's one thing they might do? Where's a conversation that they can start? Who can they get to know that they don't know well? You know,
Mhm.
and really peel back. In that, there's an exercise called Beyond First Impressions. It starts with a reflective component that really gets you to think about, uh, your own identity. What's important to you? What is the thing that you hold most dear that's a part of your character? Is it your humor? Is it your you know, uh, competency when it comes to, artistic aspirations, whatever it is. What in your life is most important to you? Is it being a parent, a spouse, a practitioner, an athlete? Is it your faith? And at the end, you create a collage with representative portions of the sheet, that reflect what the components, the different components of your life. But when you think about that, and then you think about someone that you just may have a chance encounter with at work or on the street. Just on sight, there's so much that you don't know about that person. There's a limited amount that that other person will get to know about you. So
Mhm.
what do we leave on the table? What is it that we miss out on in terms of opportunities to connect with other people? And so when you think about all of those things, all of those facets, all those components of who you are, how can you utilize that as a
Mhm.
means to get to know others? Okay.
Love
So
it.
think about one person, perhaps who doesn't look like you, who doesn't speak who doesn't share the mother tongue that you do. Maybe English is a second language.
Mhm.
Uh, who is of a different religion, nationality, whatever it is. Think about one person that you can begin to get to know more and maybe learn something from, and give them the opportunity to get to know you.
Yeah, that is a great advice, Brenda. And a lot of people in the comments are just very grateful for this conversation, for bringing this topic into our calls is really important because it is the foundation is that emotional connection. It's about relationships and love and trust. And so we are so appreciative. So we do have a slide. I don't know, David, if we want to share the slide or we're going to send the slide, but we are going to send you a slide with all of Brenda's contact information as well as information about David and I. We have a monthly newsletter, we have a YouTube channel. We are going to post this on our YouTube channel. So look for that. And we are just grateful to have Brenda, to have you today. Thank you. And to thank you for all of you who came to listen to Brenda. So we will see you next time, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.